Welcome back, Zeteskians, to Azeroth. Today we are touring Zandalar, Kultiras, Nazjatar, and Mechagon. I'll be riding my Scarlet Pterodax, which can be obtained from the Battle for Azeroth expansion, which involves these islands. You may recognize the Pterodax species from Pandaria's Isle of Thunder. Nazjatar, which you may notice is not underwater like Vashir was during the Cataclysm expansion, is part of the Old Elven Empire. During the War of the Ancients, when the first Well of Eternity exploded to stop Sargeras from entering Azeroth, Nazjatar and many other parts of the Elven Empire sank below the ocean. Queen Azshara, who had been cooperating with Sargeras to become his co-ruler of the Burning Legion, was included in those who were drowning. But the old god Enzoth offered her a deal to save herself and her people. She negotiated briefly before the deal was struck, and her people were transformed into the Naga, an aquatic serpentine species capable of breathing underwater as well as in air. They lost their legs and grew powerful tails, fins, and scales. The females grew extra arms, and the males became brutishly bulky. Their civilization continued unimpeded for 10,000 years. They commanded snapdragons, which are dog-like fish, as well as murlocs. During the events of Warcraft 3, the Naga come to the aid of the Blood Elves when they are left for dead by their human allies to fight against the might of the Scourge with, quote, nothing but sticks and harsh language, unquote. When the humans discover that Kael'thas and his blood elves had the aid of the Naga, they were imprisoned and planned to be executed. But Lady Vaj and her Naga freed the elves and led them to a portal to Outland, to join Illidan's growing army fighting against the Burning Legion. Together, they assaulted Northrend in an attempt to destroy the Lich King, but Illidan is defeated by Arthas in single combat, and his followers rescue him before he can bleed out in the snow. On Outland, Vaj's Naga and Kael'thas's Blood Elves use the waters of Zangarmarsh to sustain themselves and further the war effort. Back on Azeroth, the remainder of the Blood Elves try to rebuild Silvermoon City and the surrounding areas of Quel'Thalas. The remainder of the Naga stay with Queen Azshara in Nazjatar and continue small-scale land invasions until they are able to lead the navies of the Horde and Alliance above their waters and sink most of the fleet in one fell swoop by magically controlling the water and exposing the land to the air. Canonically, I think this place was flooded again within a few months, but in game it is preserved to be explorable for anyone who wasn't there at the time. As we explore around, we can see many of these coral creatures, which look and act very similar to the treants that live alongside the Night Elves in Kalimdor. If you played Warcraft 3, you may remember titles like Ancient of War or Ancient of Knowledge being the building names for the Night Elf forces. Most, if not all of them, died when Teldrassil was burned by Sylvanas and the Horde, which I think happened just before Queen Azshara's attack. There is also a goblinoid race of beings here with aquatic features, and some friendly ocean dwelling giants. Through the portal is Zuldazar, the capital city of Zandalar. The king was killed shortly after the Horde arrived due to some internal politics where a certain group wanted to remain isolationist and another group wanted to join the Horde. His daughter ended up joining the Horde, mostly to get protection from Sylvanas and the Zandalari who had joined her. The king, shortly before his death, made a deal with Bwamsamdi, the Loa of Death. To do this, he had to cut ties with the Loa of Kings, Razan, who looks like a T Rex. The Loa get more powerful as their number of followers grows, so Sylvanas and Nethanos systematically assaulted and destroyed most of Bwamsamdi's temples and killed as many of his followers as they could. The deal the king struck applied to his whole bloodline, so Talanji became bound to Bwamsamdi even though she never agreed to the deal. On the southeastern coast of Zandalar, there are some Mogu. I don't understand how they are involved since I thought their empire was confined to Pandaria. Further up the coast, we can see Azshara's Naga invading Zandalar. Beyond that, we enter the lands filled with dinosaurs, including nesting raptors and a small village taming triceratops like dinosaurs. Continuing north, we pass some creatures that seem frozen in time, along with a temple to Razan, including golden statues depicting his T Rex form. We can also see some azurite flowing to the surface. Azurite is the blood of Azeroth, similar to how Serenite is the blood of Yogg-Saron, the old god in Northrend. At the end of the Legion expansion, when Sargeras stabbed Azeroth in Silithus, it began bleeding all over the planet, most intensely at the wound site. Trade Prince Gallywix recognized the material from the mines of Kazan and knew that it granted sparks of inspiration to great engineers. So obviously, he started mining it whenever he could, and convinced Sylvanus and the Horde to assist him. On the southwestern coast, we can see other invading forces, which appear to be related to the Nightborn elves and the Dark Iron dwarves, perhaps fighting each other over the Azerite in the area. The western coast is mostly empty, and anyone trying to swim around that coast, be prepared for it to take a really long time with nothing to look at or interact with. Whether you go around or over the mountain, you'll arrive in Voldun, and you can visit the piles of gold, which are sadly not lootable. Voldun is a desert filled with snake people and Volpera, otherwise known as furry goblins. The snake architecture is a bit on the nose. I don't know any other species that make their buildings look like their faces, except maybe the Tauren's totem poles count? What do you think? It is strange to see giant skeletons around. It isn't limited to this area. I've seen it all over Azeroth, where skeletons exist of creatures that don't exist in game. And the scale between the size of the skeletons and the size of the zone is comical sometimes. When I first read the Dawn of the Aspects book about Galakrond being defeated by the proto-drakes who were rewarded with aspect powers and transformed into true dragons, I was surprised by how his skeleton in-game compared to the descriptions in-game. Galakrond's skeleton is maybe the width of Wyrmrest Temple, maybe a bit bigger. And proto-drakes in the game are maybe 5% that size, maybe a bit smaller. That all lines up with the descriptions in the book. However, when you compare that to the size of Northrend as a whole, or just Dragonblight, that's when things desynchronize. Similar to how the journey from Orgrimmar across Ashenvale and to the coast of Darkshore in-game only seems like a short walk. But in the lore, it is actually a 7 to 10 day fast march. It is an interesting stylistic choice to have the objects in game be human scale compared to the characters, but then the distance between things is more like airplane scale. It makes me think about quests where I had to talk to one person, walk to the next building, and talk to somebody else, or deliver a package less than 30 seconds away. In the lore, I, or the unnamed adventurers, probably delivered that package across a 6-hour running distance. In the lore, how big is Orgrimmar? That's a question I will probably revisit in the tour of Kalimdor. Ol Stompy and others like him are some of the few large creatures visible in the wilds of Azeroth. Most of the time, we're just left to wonder where these giant skeletons came from, or why they haven't been buried yet, if they are from long extinct creatures. There's even a quest with these long necked dinosaurs to help one get some romance, because the locals are concerned about the species going extinct. From the player's perspective, there are only about 4 males and 1 female on the entire continent, but from a lore perspective, there are probably at least a few dozen, maybe a few hundred. In real life, animals are considered endangered long before they reach those numbers. Although I did hear a story about cheetahs where the population dwindled down to less than 50, and conservationists protected them to repopulate. Due to a mutation in the small group, now that type of cheetah has stripes and spots, whereas before they only had spots with no stripes. You could nitpick and say that they still have only spots that just so happen to overlap to look like stripes, but then someone will counter with saying they only have stripes, which just so happen to sometimes look like spots. Over on the Blood Coast is another example of a singular corpse of a previously unknown species. Was this giant turtle the last of its kind? How many centuries did it live alone before being killed? Where are the skeletons of its relatives? Sure, they'll say Torga is a Loa, so one of a kind, but that doesn't line up with what we've seen from other Loa. Are Loa meant to be one of a kind giant creatures created by the Titans and or the Curse of Flesh, similar to the wild gods, who are mortal And we've seen their ghosts in the Emerald Dream, along with the ghosts of other mortal characters? Or are they meant to be spiritual embodiments of their dominion of dominance? When Wamsamdi gets low on worshippers, he starts to fade into nothingness. He doesn't leave a corpse or bones. Akunda appeared as a spiritual, transparent, floating thunder lizard, but Torga the turtle and Cragwa the frog appear to be flesh and blood. Razan the T Rex showed up as a ghost. Hakar has been killed a few times and seems to keep coming back. Do you think he ever runs into his old corpses? Didn't his followers use his blood to try to resurrect him? Then there's the whole can of worms about Gahun, the artificially created blood god Loa. I remember in the early days, Blizzard accidentally made two characters with the name Hakar. There was Hakar the Soul Flayer, the Loa that trolls were trying to resurrect, and there was Hakar the Houndmaster, who was a lieutenant in the Burning Legion. I think during War of the Ancients. But I think he also reappeared in more modern times. Since members of the Burning Legion have their souls returned to the Twisting Nether instead of going to the afterlife. I wonder if this whole confusion about Loa is another lore accident. Maybe the trolls worship some mortal beings as gods, and maybe they worship some immortal beings as gods too. Maybe trolls don't know the difference between something on the scale of a Gron versus something on the scale of an old god. It certainly wouldn't be the first time Blizzard has excused lore retcons or accidents by using an unreliable narrator. Anyway, as we make our way over to the Frog Loa Kragwa, we pass by more Naga as well as some servants of the old gods. Circling around Nazmir for a bit, we see more servants and even generals of the old gods, along with some blood troll villages and many skeletons and ruins. It is a bit funny to see stone troll ruins such a short walk away from their massive golden capital city. I think the walk from the edge of the docks to the throne room is about the same distance as from these ruins to the northern edge of the city, but that's probably just another scaling issue. Mechagon is an isolated island of robots and some creatures, but mostly robots. Robot squirrels, robot spiders, robot wolves, and a robot gorilla. Huge scrapyards, hovering robots controlled by warring factions of gnomes and mechanomes. But even in this isolated area, the Murlocs still arrive from the sea as the forward scouts to the Naga. After a short interlude, we arrive in Drustvar, a creepy area that should remind many of Duskwood, but with a more modern feel. The creatures here remind me of Tim Burton movies or the Game of Thrones zombies. Maybe it's just the sky shading. If you are curious enough to find a small gnome in his house, you may be rewarded with a unique battle pet. Not far away, we get our first glimpse at Jaina Proudmoore's homeland, Tiragard Sound, otherwise known as the human kingdom of Kultiras. The green anchor and flags are emblematic of this naval power that has ruled the waves since before orcs arrived on Azeroth. They were the primary naval force of the Human and Elf Alliance during the Second Orcish War, but were not involved with the Third War, otherwise known as Warcraft 3. Their only appearance in that game was during Rexar's campaign, when they tried to follow Thrall and the Horde to Kalimdor and genocide the escaped prisoner orcs. They failed because Rexar, Rokan, and Jaina Proudmoore worked together to kill Jaina's father, Dalen Proudmoore. The Alliance quests here deal with that history briefly, with Jaina confessing and being imprisoned for a short time before being freed and making up with her mother. Her brother, Derek Proudmoore, who died fighting the orcs and their enslaved red dragons during the Second War, is brought back by Nathanos and Sylvanas. They intend to mind control him into spying on Jaina and the Alliance, and ultimately doing some assassinations. However, Bane Bloodhoof betrayed Sylvanas and broke Derek out of prison to bring him to Jaina before he could be mind controlled. When he died, he was Jaina's older brother, but so much time has passed, she now appears older. To give some context on how much time has passed, the Second War was when the Orcish horde burnt Stormwind to the ground. Varian Rin was about 8 years old at the time, and Arthas Menethil was even younger. This was before Jaina went to Dalaran to study magic and met Kael'thas Sunstrider, before she dated Arthas, before the Delphius Masons Guild became outlaws after rebuilding Stormwind unpaid, before the Scourge arrived in the Eastern Kingdoms, before the Night Elves gave up their immortality to send Archimonde back to the Twisting Nether, before Anduin Rin was born, his mother killed by angry citizens unhappy with young Varian's rule, before Sylvanas was killed and resurrected as a banshee, before the Lich King was killed and replaced with Bolvar Fordragon in secret, before Deathwing and the Cataclysm, before Garrosh dropped a mana bomb on Theramore. Heck, it was before Theramore was even built. The world Derek remembers hasn't existed for a generation or more. Don't mind me trying to unlock this flight path point. I had missed this small prison island on my earlier expeditions to explore this zone. Up on the northern coast, there are some Lovecraftian statues and a foggy area which will stop me from flying temporarily. But not far from there is a goofy giant with a massive honey stick. If we fly up a hill, we can see where he may have gotten his honey from. Beyond the farmlands, there are some brambles which remind me of the Quillbore magic in Southern Barrens and Mulgore, and a village of giants. We don't often see them in groups, usually they are just wandering the forest, but it is nice to know that they have their own society as well. Maybe we should feel bad about genociding them instead of trying to allow them into our alliances, like the ogres and undead abominations, which are similarly sized. On the western coast, we can see some cannon laden fortresses and a mechanical pirate boat. Nearby is the Horde invasion point where we end our tour. I hope you enjoyed a walk down memory lane. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I have new videos coming out every Saturday.